while people are coming in to join around that fire. I will just describe a little bit about what will go on for the first part. I'll be sharing, sort of jumping to and from a presentation deck and trading stories with you. And you're free along the way if you want to chime in with a question, something that's a burning question right then. I'll jump out and do a little sidebar with you during that discussion and then continue. But just know that at the end of the presentation, Carolina, hello. As we get deeper into the discussion and I finish with the formal share, we'll just dive into a whole discussion where everyone's welcome to join in and we'll chat. So just know that that's coming, but if you have a burning question along the way, we can certainly deal with those as well, which will be fun. So it looks like there's some people still coming in around the digital campfire. You know, when Tina invited me to do this, I had just spent several years, 5 years, as an executive R&D Imagineer. And so it was a very interesting time where I was taking all my traditional training and training of adopting new technology along the way. I, for instance, had worked on the very first Tron. And so I had the classical training and was an early adopter of new technologies as well. And she talked about coming and having a session like this where we would talk. And I told her, well, I don't have sort of a formal curriculum and classes, but man, there's so much I'm learning along the way as I'm dealing with all these different silos of science and brilliant PhDs who are anxious to get insights into what makes characters tick, what makes them come alive, and that whole thing. So I told her I'd be happy to share some of those stories of the learnings that we've done together about trying to capture that illusion of life, spark of life. So it looks like, oh goodness, good. It looks like Klaus and David, and I see a lot of people. I don't see people brave enough to turn their cameras on though. I would love to see faces instead of, hey, all right, yay, there's people waving. That's good. Oh, I feel much more comfortable now. We're around the campfire. Now I'll kick off my shoes now. Okay, this is a good thing. Excellent. I love seeing where everybody is. And there's a green screen there that's ready to go if we need some effects, Jim. Yeah. All right.
We're still bringing people over, but please carry on.
Still bringing people over. Well, I won't.
We can still hear you and see you.
I won't start formally with the deck until we get a few more faces in. You can tell me when we've sort of reached quorum here. But okay. I was telling her that, you know, it was so interesting to work with people who were arguably the most brilliant people handpicked in the world for certain specialty sciences that they were dealing with in all the complexities of putting together systems that will deal with thinking, feeling characters going forward. But that simple reminders of observing life, bringing things in from life were sort of a revelation to many of them. And so it became a real active sort of give and take of acknowledging the brilliance and the degrees in one area, but inviting them to become true observers of life, which has been learned over millennia with storytelling and, on the stage and on film and in animation and stop motion and CGI and on and on. We've found ways to really get to the essence of what characters are thinking and feeling and make sure that that communicates well. And if you combine that sort of philosophy with the brilliance in their areas of technology, then you see things really start to bloom in a way that the brilliance alone without guidance toward those principles a lot of times makes smaller steps. It doesn't reach as far into the sort of the magical moments. So, well, it looks like we have a nice quadrant of names and a few faces. I would invite any of the rest of you who wish to add your faces to the mix to go ahead and turn on your cameras. You can leave your microphones muted if you have barking dogs or things like that. But what do you think, Tina? Are we? Oh, good. More and more people. Wow, this is great.
Yeah, we're down to, I think there's 2 more to flip over.
I told you.
Yeah. Hey.
You know, I was telling you we will definitely profit from having goggles all around and sitting around a dimensional campfire eventually to make all of this happen. So, all right.
You're ready to go.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
All righty. Well, let me dive in. I'll do a little screen share here. So I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, are aware of the wonderful book by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson called The Illusion of Life. And it's really about that beautiful artistry that makes you forget that you're even looking at drawings, and you swear that you're seeing characters that have thoughts and feelings and very individual personalities. And emerging technologies are quickly leading toward the autonomous illusion of life, which I'm calling the spark of life. And when that's done well, that same magical moment where you swear the character has thoughts and feelings and an individual personality will bloom right in front of you in real time. There's going to be rapport building, and it's going to be absolutely magical if it's done well. If it's not done well, it's just systems that are moving things around generically and making noise at you, and it will be annoying. So we have a job to do. We need to teach systems how to dig for the gold, and we need to inspire the people who are designers of these systems to really reach for the essence of the illusion of life so that it can be protected and expanded as it becomes the spark of life. So I hope all of you will become protectors of the spark of life going forward. Okay, today's talk is entitled Eccentricity Isn't Odd, It's Life. I'll start with this statement I made at a Tech and Future seminar just a couple of years ago before the pandemic hit, and I was trying to be a little provocative. It kind of worked. I said to the group, we will not win the next technology race with better technology. We will win the next technology race with better philosophy. Just ask Walt. And of course, I was talking about Walt Disney. If you go back to the early days of animation, they didn't sort of become kings of the hill of that era because they had better tools to work with, better technology. Everybody pretty much had the same thing. There were down shooter cameras and stacks of drawings, and if you saw them in rapid sequence, they would seem to move. But they put in the extra effort to think about giving their characters behaviors where you swore they had thoughts and feelings and a personality. And so they moved past the illusion of motion to the illusion of life, and motion became emotion. So that was by virtue of philosophy. That was reaching for something. That was anybody who was competing with them could have done that with the same tools. So they won by virtue of philosophy. Another area where they really excelled was, amusement parks were available for families to have pleasant diversions. But Walt and his team wanted families to have more than that. They wanted dynamic immersion into story and character space. So they created theme parks, and activities became adventures. Look at robotics in Walt and his team's hands. It became audio animatronics, and science became story. Now, as computer graphics came along, there were a lot of us who reached past just the visual effects to emotional effects, created vivid characters so that pixels became performance. And now we're at a threshold where reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence is about to become blended reality, where immersion is companionship. And all of these endeavors profited from having a philosophy that was around emotion and human connection, and is now giving birth to this whole spark of life era. And I happen to have a personal investment in a lot of those areas that I talked about because my career happened to embrace them. So I'll take just a moment here to do a review. In animation, I started out as a Disney feature animator. Here's a publicity photo they took of me in the 70s. I was actually teacher's assistant for year one of the CalArts character animation program and had sort of a career in that field. And then with theme parks, that was mentioned. To date, I've directed 21 of the theme parks that are in the various parks around the world. I think the only park I'm not in yet is Shanghai. With robotics and audio animatronics, I don't know if any of you saw this, but recently the Kiwi project was announced to the public. That's why I can even mention it. The free-walking autonomous robotic bipedal platform. I was creative director of that for several years running, and love that. In CGI, I was on the first Tron. I was one of the 2 computer graphics choreographers for that project, and then became an early adopter. of it through the years. And most recently, I was media director on Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. I don't know how many of you have written that, but I used CG extensively in that project as well. So early adopter of all of that. And in virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, et cetera, I've been pushing into that from the early 2000s, and most recently even did, there's some augmented reality and immersive space. But I was creative lead for an AI companion, and I can't say more about it than just that, but eventually someone somewhere will announce that as well. But that was a wonderful adventure, very deep into the spark of life. And I also happen to have provided an AI voice. I spent the many, many hours training an AI character to be able to speak and hopefully have some spark of life. And it's now has its autonomy. I send it out into the world. And so there's other people working with it doing who knows what. But you will likely meet it one day. But it's also, I can't say its name or where it lives. I also happen to be a Writers Guild writer and a DGA director. And I just feel with all of that experience so far that we're at a new threshold moment. And it really pits generic versus individual. So many projects now have efficiencies built in that fight individuality and move towards generic. Certainly in computer graphics, there's, so many of us have seen drag and drop sort of systems that allow you to replicate gestures and expressions. And I was telling Tina, I often see characters that have the same little zippy gestures, like no matter who they are, they just all have the same thing. And I can tell that there's the replication going on. And, that it gets stories told, and it doesn't always happen. There's a lot of good work that's happening too, but it does coax people with efficiency toward the generic and sort of everybody behaving the same rather than the spark of individuality. And also in artificial intelligence, I mean, one of the backbones of that is mass data. And, in most usages, mass data tends to push you towards the average of what millions of people would do. And sort of the wonderful eccentricity of all those individuals disappears into the soup in the middle, which is actually the sort of the least interesting case to take on. Now I'll dive back in again. So I would just like to remind you that generic is the enemy of the spark of life. The spark of life is essentially the spark of individual life, the spark of eccentric life, the spark of one life. Without that, you've got zombies. And it was interesting. I was having a talk with a group of people whose task was to solve exactly these things. Brilliant group of people dealing with artificial intelligence in all its many facets. And I reminded them one day, we were having a session like this, but we were in a conference room. And I just reminded them, I said, right now, freeze frame, all of you in the room, different poses, different expressions, different timing, different fidgets, different sort of templates of body language, all of that, like right now. And so they all suddenly like froze and look around and they realized, oh crap, we are, every one of us is an individual. And it's funny, they got a little self-conscious at that moment. But there was a head of the group. He was the leader, but his tradition was always to come in, find a chair, find the little lever and go and go down as far as possible. He'd be the lowest head in the room. And for him, that was instead of archetype of leader, that to him was his comfortable spot, was the lowest point in the room. There was also a brilliant scientist who would zoom in from somewhere else, and everything she said was brilliant contribution to our conversation. But in running webcams, it's like a little lacking. So I would always see like her eyes at the horizon, mostly ceiling up here. And she would say absolutely brilliant things. But when I pointed out that was sort of the eccentricity I always expected from her, she sadly started correcting and sort of doing a better job with that. It's kind of sad. It was kind of charming to see those little eyes peeking over the horizon. And there was also someone who would answer questions with the group. Whenever he's asked a question, he would go into a routine where it was like eyes closed, guaranteed for the first half of the answer, and then eyes looking up at the ceiling for the second part, and then a little eye contact right at the end, done. And just guaranteed that was going to be the ritual that characters would go through. So that our brains are comfortable when we come into a space and what we encounter is a collection of eccentrics. a collection of one of a kinds. There's something that's just creepy and is sort of uncanny valley about coming into a space and everyone is sort of generically behaving the same way with the same kind of speed of gestures and the same general expressions. And those spikes of eccentricity that make us all one of a kind are missing. It's like most people probably wouldn't know why they're feeling uncomfortable, but that's a very uncomfortable feeling to happen. So we always have to remember that eccentricity of the one is key. Now, somebody can ask, well, is creating an archetype achieving the spark of life? I've had people say that. Well, I'm building an archetype. Well, no, not if you're treating it as the finish line. Archetype is the starting line, not the finish line. And I'll take you to this moment, a casting moment. I encountered it many times as in my role as director over the years and as a writer. But I would write a script. So I'd have the same script page. I would be imagining the same lighting, same angle, same direction, same archetypal character. But I would cast, for example, Bill Murray in that role or George Clooney. Suddenly you have the same input, radically different outcome because they're thinking, feeling individuals. And that's life. It throws it at us constantly. In life, individuality is absolutely a given. In animation and AI and robotics, individuality is not a given whatsoever, unless you carefully craft it and force it in. And I'm not just talking about individuality of how it looks. That design is great, but that's not the answer to achieve the full character. And not just what it says. I know in AI, there's a lot of writing of answers. Like that seems to have been where most of the effort went at the beginning. And it's not just how it sounds. You know, if you combine all of those things, it looks a certain way, says certain things, and sounds a certain way with the voice. It's just glorified radio. I swear, you could spend like $35 on a little radio, or you could spend $5 million carving a character to beautifully look like someone from an iconic film. And if its main job is just be the housing for the speaker to say the words to me, you're just spending a lot of money on radio. That's not the secret. Behavior is the big key to unlock individuality in characters, and not just while it's talking. Your character is telling you just as much when it's listening as when it's talking. And people have talked about the behavior being a key to unlock the key to a character, not just what they say. In fact, as the character is listening to you, if you're talking about different subjects and you see a character get particularly interested in what you're talking about and get closer and want to hear more, and maybe pantomime some of the stuff you're talking about because it's getting involved with it, that tells you where its interests are. If it's retreating, it's scared about something you're talking about, or if it's the kind of character that's kind of bored and is starting to fidget and goof off with someone else to distract them while you're trying to talk, that tells you something about the character. And I love this one. People often talk about dialogue versus pantomime. I have never seen that as a choice, one or the other. You always have to have both playing in compatible zones, in companionship zones. So sometimes a character, what they're saying and how they're behaving will give you a deeper layer of the same thing. A character could say, yeah, sure, I'd like to go with you, but they're sort of nervously fidgeting and really looking anxious. So you can tell they really would like to, that they're trying to downplay it and act like, yeah, that's cool. I'd like to go. But their little nervous fidget shows there's true excitement underneath of it. So it's giving you a little more. Or it could be absolutely the contradiction. And I love these kind of things. You could have a character saying, yeah, Jerem, I'm absolutely fine. I don't know why you're asking. I'm feeling just great. Why do you ask? And while it's doing that, it might be having a drink from a paper cup and it's sort of wadding the paper cup into a little ball and it's ripping it into pieces and it's flipping the pieces and one of them ricochets off my face as it asks, why do you ask? So the behavior is telling you the opposite of what the dialogue is saying. So there's so many opportunities for dialogue and behavior to give you either deeper layers or contradicting layers so that it reveals that a character might be sort of betraying what the truth is with its words. Now, as we go here, okay, somebody might say, okay, behavior is what you're talking about. I get it. It's not all just dialogue. So how about if we do a walk cycle? And I've had groups that do that say, oh, take next week and do a couple of walk cycles. That'll get the behavior worked out. It's like, well, if you're doing walk cycle as moving from point A to point B, that's a very simple thing done right away. If you're seeing how the character moves from point A to point B while feeling many different things, it becomes very interesting assignment. So I did this little partial list for some folks I was dealing with over at Disney. How does this character walk, this one character, while it's feeling neutral for its character? So it has its own particular walk, or happy, or jubilant, different from happy, or maybe dreamy, blissful. Okay, different from all of the above. That's yet a different shading. How about it's feeling mischievous while it's walking, or truly sneaky? It's up to no good. How about curious or explorative? Maybe it's shy and embarrassed while it's walking, or this is kind of a fun one, an empathetic walk. It might be walking beside another character and trying to show that it feels for it and falling in step, but the other character is much bigger or much smaller, and it's hard for it to adopt the same gait. So that could be a fun assignment. How about if it's bored? How does it walk then? Or depressed, different from bored? How about disgusted or absolutely livid? How does it walk? Or nervously walking, or terrified, or determined and heroic? Okay, here's an interesting one, happily exhausted. What's that? Well, let's say that your character has just run a marathon and it beat its personal best by 2 seconds. So it's exhausted, but it's happily exhausted. I made it. How about wearily exhausted? Same scenario, your character missed beating its personal best by 2 seconds. Oh, the whole effort was not worth it. Did not succeed. Now that's just walking. So how does your character now run while it's feeling all those things? How does it stand while it's feeling all of those things? How does it do something like eat while it's feeling all those things? What's like an angry bite versus a curious bite or a blissful bite? How does your character do something like put on a coat when it's feeling every one of those feelings? It's easy to think of simple ones like that, the angry thing where the thumb is getting caught in the lining and it rips the lining out, puts it back in, and then the sleeve comes off. Or maybe blissful, where it's just confident and talking about itself, bragging, and puts the coat on upside down, walks out with an upside down coat. So there's so many fun things you can do. How does it listen when it's feeling all those different things? How does it talk? Of course, you get to that. And then this is a beautiful puzzle. How does it try to hide what it's feeling while it's feeling every one of those things? Now, this is all for one individual character. Every other individual character demands its own unique solutions. And you have to move past archetypes to individuals, and you have to underline eccentricities. And I'll just mention that I'm using the word eccentricities on purpose because I think it makes us dig deeper into individual unique differences between characters, that, the asymmetry of a little smile. And by the way, I rebel against ZBrush's like auto mirror replication on both sides, because it's nature does not have symmetry. In people, like we are all asymmetrical. Even if we seem fairly symmetrical, we're all asymmetrical. So when I talk about eccentricities, I think it makes us dig deeper into the nuance of difference. So I like that word. Now, this isn't simple, but it is fun. To me, this is where the fun starts. My God, those assignments, if somebody just says, I do a walk cycle, it's like, what do you do? But if you get into all of those specifics we talked about and come up with your own, it becomes really interesting to take on. It's where characters start to live. It's where stories begin. It's where emotions really engage. Until the door slams on you. And that will bring me to an example that was kind of fun to talk about with a group of characters that was designing an AI system. And of course, they wanted to have some areas where they could have more efficiencies. So they talked about having certain things that would just be automated reflex action. So like when a doctor hits your knee with a little hammer and your leg twitches. So they said, okay, loud noise equals all characters just flinch. Done with that, check mark, move on to the next thing. And I said, wait, you're handcuffing me. as a storyteller. And they said, what? It's just like a loud noise and a flinch. So I said, okay, let's go through this scenario. Two characters in a scene. It's a living room, summer afternoon, two characters sitting there. There's a middle-aged man who's come over to visit. There's a 6-year-old little girl sitting in the chair, and she's sort of shyly smiling at the guy, waiting for the rest of the family to come in. And there's just a moment of pleasant silence. Suddenly, boom, loud slamming screen door. Immediately, the guy lurches into a fetal curl, almost falls off his chair. The little girl sprouts a big smile and runs directly toward that sound. That's because he's got PTSD. She has had months and months of having her best friend come over from next door and slam that door, and they go to playtime and fun, and they have a great old time. So to him, it means grenade. To her, it means the best fun in the world. So that whole area where individuality sets characters apart, it instills the characters with more interest. It makes the storytelling itself much more deeply engage people in what's going on. If both of them just did a generic flinch at that point, you wouldn't be curious about that much. You'd wonder what made the noise. But when you see this drastically different behavior from the two characters, you're immediately drawn in, like, why is he that afraid? And why is she like fearless and like happy at this loud noise? So it's great to remind ourselves that that point of eccentric differences is where interest really begins. Individuality is where interest starts. Speaking of individuality, you are seeing here Henry Selick, my good friend. My question is, can mass data create Henry Selick? Well, there's an interesting question. And this came from an actual conversation that happened. I will show you this image. This is from Vanity Fair. Annie Leibovitz was taking a photograph of the group of us in our first classroom, A113. Henry, you can see him over on the very right, leaning into the picture. Now, I was sitting up upper next to the left, next to Brad, up on the shelf. And I took this shot when I was sitting up on the shelf, looking down at Henry just before Annie started clicking away. And it's to me, it's just a normal shot, but it's very indicative of Henry's gesture palette. He's very expressive in how he talks to people. So, which leads me to a conversation that I had with a scientist who had a capture sphere at a university, and he was bringing in multiple people, trackless. He could detect their behavior, and I was very excited about the potential for that. My goodness, if you don't have to prepare people for tracking, you just have miscellaneous people come in for testing, what a rich set of things you could gather. I wasn't quite as excited when he told me what they were studying, which was groups of people getting ready to make a purchase at a counter in a store. So it was like the behaviors of people preparing for purchase. So I was not quite as interested, but I said, well, it'd be great to get into emotion and individuality in that capture space. It would be great. He was kind of doubtful about exploring emotions. And I said, oh, I swear to God, if you can study how people are behaving when they're about to buy something, I swear, it's like if we take people and study their emotions, you can get great gesture palettes coming off of that. I was talking about bringing a storyteller in, having kids come into that space and listen to the stories that are going through all different emotions, and then let the kids up and have them tell the stories. Even do things like have a military family that have a reunion in that space. They haven't seen each other for months, and have it be a warm and wonderful thing, but measure the emotions that go on in a moment like that. So he thought that I was like reaching pretty far. And then I mentioned individuality, and he said, oh, no, that's years off. And he said, well, I have a friend, Henry. I would like to send him into your dome. And I swear you could gather his gesture palette, and it would be such an interesting thing to have to write on top of mass data. And he said, no. The thing is, you have years of knowing Henry and how he behaves and moves. And so that's why you can recognize him. And I said, beg to differ. I could just pantomime for you Henry's gesture palette. By the way, Henry, if you ever watch this, I love you. I think your gestures are great. So I said, I could describe to you Henry's gestures, like the things that I sort of typically do here. He does typically up above his head. And so I could show you a basic set of gestures, send you into a party with 300 people. You've never met him before. You could find him in 1 minute. Swear to God. So I really think that if people that are building these systems start to study the spikes of difference that set people apart from mass data averages, it's really become a wonderful tool. So I called it the spikes of difference algorithm. So the spikes of difference between mass data and Henry Selick make him stand out. Now, I would just remind you too that you don't have to be like the 1% difference. You could have a slider to go, let's find out what's 10% or 20 or 50% difference between mass data and where Henry sits. But you can fight mass data zombies with SODA. And SODA, I called the spikes of difference algorithm. Now, I don't actually have that made into an algorithm yet, but we can be the manual practitioners of the algorithm in our heads. So we can always look for the spikes of difference that set characters apart. And eventually when systems can do this, when they can take the top set of spikes of difference from Henry and then have it right on top of mass data that's carrying some of the weight, we can really have individuality come sparkling through. Assignment, I would love for all of you to try this. Go to either, Netflix has, I think, 3 seasons of this, and the website, I believe, has 11 seasons. It's called Off Camera with Sam Jones. Now, he's a photographer who he took still shots of people in music and sports and film. And he decided to do this interview series where he would have extended conversations with them, not promoting anything that they were doing, just getting to know them. And if you look at the promos, you won't get this, but if you look at full episodes, you'll see that he did this wonderful thing where he left the camera running all the time so that all the little fidgets, the extra breathing, the looking off and trying to remember, like all the little stuff that make individuals themselves is left in. Most of that is absolutely cut out when you go to quick promotional things. So that's wonderful. I was noticing gestures right away. Sarah Silverman is a very brave performer, but as you can see here, she was sort of kind of tied up in a knot at the beginning of the performance, and she did this thing where she had her hands clasped. And for about the first third of the interview, she would do like small hand gestures, but there was the cutest thing. I'd never seen anyone do this before, where she used her thumbs in lieu of hand gestures. So what would normally happen, I'm here was like bing, bing with her thumbs. And I went, spike of difference. Never seen that before. Mark that down. That sets her apart as being unique. And then I was watching Robert Downey Jr. He was on, and he had this fidget that he would do occasionally. And man, what a listener he is. He's the most active listener in the world. If you watch his face while he's being asked a question, it's just, oh man, he's thinking about where your question might be going, how he might answer it, if it's good or bad. And like this, preparing the story for you, it just, you see it all happening in that face. But he had this fidget he was wearing the long sleeves there and the sort of glove sleeves at the time. And he did this thing where as he was talking to them, would just sort of absentmindedly take the cloth on his palm and roll it up. He only did it a couple times, but it caught my eye. He would roll up the cloth and capture it, and then do it in the other hand and capture it. So he'd be sitting there with the captured little rolled up sleeves, and then of course let them go during some gesture. So that was his unique thing. It took me back to other observations at Disney in the last few years. I was with this team. One of the robotics brilliant scientists, his fidget was he wore sleeves that were a little bit too long and they were buttoned. And when he would talk about important things, when he was doing presentation, his ritual was to unbutton and rebutton that sleeve many, many times. And I wasn't thinking about it. And when he was done with his presentation, he would stop with the fidget. I had a boss. He had a much more elaborate set of fidgets, but they all had kind of a similar structure to them. So here's one somebody comes in for the presentation. As they greet and he sits down, there's the noticing of a tape dispenser where the tape is a little bit off square at the end. So there is the taking apart of the tape dispenser, the pulling out and the perfect cutting square of the end of the tape, and then the putting back together of the tape dispenser and putting it on the table at the end of the person's presentation. Now, he'd been listening. His comments about the presentation were really good, but that was his particular, very elaborate set of fidgets. And everybody has their own set of fidgets that we bring into life. So even down to breathing, I had a discussion with a group that was doing synthetic voice work, and I asked them, did you remember to breathe? And they were, well, there's somebody breathing right now. Asked somebody was, if they remembered to breathe, and they asked me what I was talking about. And I said, well, you know, if you just listen to your friend talking on the phone, or you listen to newscasters, if you go to off camera, I sent him back there again, said, you're going to hear people's breathing patterns. And there is going to be this creepy, uncanny valley thing that's going to come in again if you have synth voice characters, no matter how beautiful their voice sounds, if they never breathe. And breathing is not just a generic thing. Again, it tracks toward an individual's habits. I was watching Ellen Page on off camera, and during this one section of the interview, she just got so excited about what she was talking about that there was a whole paragraph with multiple sentences that she didn't even breathe during that whole paragraph. And at the end, one big breath. And that was her pattern. I saw Patton Oswalt, and he was quite the opposite. He could talk while breathing several times in a single sentence before he was done. So he had like a lot of breathing. She had save it because I'm too busy like pushing the words out. So there's just so many different eccentricities of the one, including breath, that are on display. And I would just invite you to go either like sign up for a month or two on the website. I think it's only $5. And go through it, or go to Netflix. If you have Netflix, there's several seasons on there, and watch entire episodes of somebody that you like. There's so many different really interesting characters, and all of their being alive in the moment, all their sort of living the moment is retained in the full episodes. So if you could like pick out any two and try to make observations for yourselves about what are their spikes of difference that make them uniquely themselves. And I think you'll just have a great time, first of all, seeing that kind of depth in these interesting people that you haven't seen in other interviews before. And you'll also, it's a great place to have all of that behavior sort of on a silver platter for you to study, where it's easy to pick it out because you just kept the two shot and the singles and the close-ups, and it's all in black and white, where you can really just study what's going on so easily. So after you do that, though, obviously take it out into real life and just make observations in your friends and out in the public. Just find those spikes of difference that set us apart. Now, it's also important, whether we're doing traditional projects or immersive AI projects, to remember that it's good to think of characters as having life beyond the frame. They, what are they doing before you interact with them, and after? Like, what is their entire life like? It was really interesting. Somebody asked me how much sort of quality performance that would be needed as we enter this new era. And they had kind of imagined you push a button and the stuff just happens. So I was saying, oh my goodness, we really need to train the systems how to capture individuality for much longer performances than you've ever seen before. And I was using the example of a campfire for 5 minutes with 3 characters sitting around it. Now, in a traditional project, you might need 8 minutes or so of quality performance, because you have in film the wide shot and the 2 shots, the close-ups, the cutaways, and that kind of thing. But if you're in an immersive experience, either in game world, in VR, or physically with these new AI characters, which I was part of a team helping them get born and walk out into the world, you of course have to keep all 3 characters alive for all 5 minutes, because anyone can look anywhere during that experience. So it's 15 minutes of quality performance, not just general generic movement, while they're sitting around the campfire as characters are listening. Who's interested in the story? Who's bored? Who's so interested that they forgot that their marshmallow is in the flames and it's burning, and by the time they bring it back to eat it, they're eating a flaming thing and then scream. So it's just all this stuff of really keeping characters alive in the moment is, there's going to be more of that ever that is needed. So yes, there's going to be autonomy, but there's a lot of hard work and training coming from actors and animators and directors and writers to teach that moment. Now, we did this interesting experiment. There was an animator, Jared Bishop. He's brilliant at all kinds of technology things that apply well beyond the animation field, but he also was really getting into character performance. And so I said, well, let's just try an experiment. Let's take this scene with Yoda training Luke in the swamp, and whenever the film cuts away from him, you just keep him alive in your character, CGI character, and your task is to try to replicate the performance on screen as well as possible. And then whenever it cuts away, plausibly keep Yoda thinking and feeling in the moment and ready to hook up again on the other side of that. So let us watch that, and I'll chat after.
Always with you what cannot be done. Hear you nothing that I say.
Master, moving stones around is one thing. This is totally different.
No, no different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try.
I can't. It's too big.
Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you? And where you should not. For my ally is the Force. And a powerful ally it is. Life creates it. Makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the Force around you. Here, between you, me, the tree, the rock, everywhere. Yes, even between the land and the ship.
All right. So it was very interesting. I talked to a research scientist after that was taking part in this, and he said, being able to watch Yoda as I would if I were in an immersive experience with him during the cutaways, I felt even more sort of empathetic for what he was going through. He said, when Luke was starting to lift the ship out of the water, that seeing Yoda's eyes widen with hope and then reach out to actually try to help, and then to see it sort of fade from him, he felt more of an emotional investment in the character. So, the fact that we're always striving for that living moment constantly as we're with these characters in an immersive space is going to be a really important task. Now, a lot of people have been keeping characters moving in video games for a long, long time, and I've been using them for a long, long time. And so this question is often, so if I keep my character moving all the time, am I keeping it alive all the time? The answer is, well, no, that's not your assignment. Your assignment is not to keep it moving all the time. Your assignment is to keep it thinking and feeling all the time. Every movement has a reason. Like, why is your character moving? And this brings me to another interesting experience we had with system builders. They had a moment where a character would wave to you as you're meeting the character, and they had that listed as one thing. So this moment of meeting was the wave, and it was a single item on the list. So striving for the spark of life, though, I said, well, I would consider it a greeting because they might not wave. They might do a head nod or a thumbs up or who knows what they'll do. But I would consider it probably 6 things. And so I gave them this list, and I'll show you the list first, and then I'll take you through how that might play out. So first of all, in an immersive world, characters are busy with an activity. They're not just waiting to interact with you, doing nothing. So they're involved with the activity. And then the first 2 beats are related, since an approaching interruption, and how does that interruption make you feel? So those are the first 2 things. There's an interruption, how do I feel about it? 3 and 4 are related. Discover who's doing the interrupting and how does that person make you feel? Those are related. Then the last 2, because of all of that, you retreat to your activity or let go of the activity and then greet based on rapport with the character. So, as that plays out, let me take you through a couple scenarios here. So maybe I'm the character and I'm involved with something that's been really frustrating, taking me a long time, and I'm really having a frustrating time doing it. But then I'm aware somebody's coming. Well, how do I feel about it? Oh, why now? I've been working at this so long. It's why now, right? First and second beats. Third and fourth beat. Third is I turn and look and see it's you. And oh, wait, I changed. There's hope. You might be able to help me. So now I'm in a good mood. And beat 5 and 6, I let go of what I'm doing and I turn to you and I give you a heart clasp. It's like, oh, you're my hero. Welcome. Come help me. Save me from my problems. Or different track. Character's frustrated, working on the thing, aware that somebody's interrupted, and is hopeful. Maybe they can help me. Then it turns and sees that it's you. Oh, you're a prankster. You're not going to help me. I know you. So now I retreat back to my work and I go, hey, that's your whole greeting. It's just a little half-hearted nod. So there's a lot of different kind of things that we can do moment by moment to keep the character thinking and feeling all the time. And it's really critical. If you skip thoughts, you're not thinking. And if you do that, like carving it out really bluntly, as I was doing, it definitely plays. I took an animator through some different scenarios of that, all the different moments, variations of that path of being aware, feeling about it, seeing who's doing the interrupting, how do they feel about them, either retreating or giving up the activity and doing the greeting. It led many, many different ways, but always you could see the thinking going on in the character and the emotions going on in the character. And even if you you make it less bluntly carved out, you just have little sparks of it, being aware of it while you produce it will make it much more alive. Just having it auto turn. And by the way, that we could discuss this more in a subsequent session, but it also requires the people designing the system curating what the character knows at any given time, because the sensors are out there and probably know exactly who's approaching when they're outside the door, even before they come in. If the character knows that too, like the God system, boring. You have to curate that and have the character discover a step at a time who's even approaching and what it's about. So that was also an interesting comes the dawn moment for some system designers, that they could not just give the characters all the information that the sensors were providing. They had to carefully curate how they arrived at the character. It just takes me to a moment of engineering for the real world. All this stuff is, great philosophy, but there is the moment where you have to build it. And recently the Kiwi project, the free walking autonomous character, was announced by Disney. And so that's the only reason I could put it in this deck. But, you're actually working on building complex, small things. And I was creative lead, and at the point where it was just legs and a torso, didn't even have a head or arms, it was still capable, with us all concentrating on emotion. It was capable of doing the kind of pantomime and movement that and timing in its movement, where people could know that it was feeling happy or feeling depressed. There were whole groups of people coming through on tours inside the studio that would go, oh, when it had its feelings hurt, or laugh when it started like grooving to music and all kinds of cool stuff. So it showed its potential early on. then again, the only reason I can mention it is because the public video has come out. Baby Groot was the first sort of character that the Kiwi system took out into the world, and that's just happening. And so Scott Lavallee, the lead of that project, who's absolutely brilliant, and his whole brilliant team, they came to me before they did the engineering of the upper part and said, you know, we need range of motion. So how should we do this? And I said, well, the best way to do that is range of emotion. And because, man, instead of just doing calisthenics and sort of prearranged separate pieces of movement, when you string together where emotions take you that are strong, there's subtleties and there's boldness that you never would have predicted. So I wrote a story for the Groot character and worked with a motion capture performer who's wonderful, Stasia Surdijk. She actually was our on-screen character in Soaring Fantastic Flight. She's Camelia Falco with her Falcon Aletta in the Tokyo Soaring Fantastic Flight show. So she's done work for us, guest facing, but she also has done a lot of secret work behind the scenes. And I'm so glad that this one has finally been shown to the public. But she's one of those rare performers who can forget about all the tech and just keep in the emotional space. So I took the character through a whole range of emotions, from everything from absolute depression to confession and imitating other characters and discovery and enchantment and falling in love and heartbroken and even tears. And we even sought ways to get a tear in the eye of the little animatronic character, robotic character. And then redemption and dancing, all in one connected experience. So instead of a bunch of separate pieces, you would see one emotion become the next emotion, which again was much more informative for the system. So range of emotion gave us much better range of motion for better engineering. And I also should mention, the eyes have it. While we were working on the character, just to get a first version that was debuting guest facing, we really were trying to figure out where to put the most effort, and we really paid attention to the movement of the eyes. No matter how beautiful a character is sculpted or generally how it moves, if those eyes break the rules of nature, it will be dead. You won't know why, but it will not come alive. So doing like a little eye darts, only moving smoothly when it's tracking an actual thing. We've definitely followed all those rules. And there's this is a reference scene I gave to the team before they got into the building, just a reminder of those little eye darts in the character already, as done by Marvel. So those little eye darts that keep it alive. When in robotics, when you see that broken and it's just the eyes smoothly glide over, it just is so dead. And I was so happy that when I read the article about someone who experienced our Baby Groot robotic character, they specifically said in the article, you know, when it like a number of times it caught my eye, it like made eye contact, and I forgot I was even looking at a robot. It felt alive. So going to the trouble to work on those eyes and make sure they had the movement that you expect to see in nature really did pay off. And then I would also mention, and I'm almost done here, almost ready to open up to the general discussion, but thinking of a character as alive often drives solutions. So latency, you know, there's a lot of things that we do where under the hood, there's a lot of processes going on and there's delay. So, well, guess what? We have latency, we have delay. It's called thinking. And in fact, I heard this co-founder CEO of 23andMe interviewed last week, and the person asking the questions, they were doing a rapid fire, just like one-word answers, and she was like, going. And then they said, what would you never want to know about your future? And it's like, boom, she stopped. And to me, that was the most interesting thing. It's like, oh, you could see the wheels turning. Now there's thought going on. So actually taking a system where there's going to be delay because there's a lot that has to go on under the hood, and defaulting to something that really rings true as a thoughtful moment for that character. It doesn't always work, but when it works, it doesn't just cover the problem of delay. It makes you feel that the character is even more alive because, wait, it didn't just auto answer me. It has to think about it before it answers. So that's becomes a very interesting tool. Confusion also, there was people building systems. I have a lot of sensors out there. There's too much going on. Everybody's talking at once and it's confused. And I said, well, we encounter that. Like teachers have classrooms that are running amok and they're confused. Admit it. You say, hey, everybody's talking at once. It's bedlam. I cannot understand any of you. Quiet. Okay, one of you. Okay, you talk. What? So, having a character, instead of like trying to hide the problem, like we wouldn't hide the problem. We'd say, hey, too much noise. So it helps admit it and move forward. Also, there's an issue of safe actions as we get into physical space with interactive robots and stuff. Again, if you think of it as alive, you think of safe behavior instead of just save action. So for example, if you had a character putting on a demonstration of some kind of battle moves or some kind of interesting thing that had a lot of activity that was dangerous to get close to, and a kid wandered away from the parents and came up close, you could either have sensors automate that it doesn't put its arm out as far or something, but continue with what it's doing, which to me rings a little false. It's like it's unaware of the kid and it's just self-editing. To me, what makes the character absolutely alive is, oh, I see the kid. It's like, oh, sweetie, I've been down. I pull my arms in. I don't do any dangerous moves because we protect the kid. That's what we would do if we're alive and thinking. So you have the character do that and say, hey, who belongs to this little charmer? And maybe you can take them back. Okay, now I'll get back. Now I'll do the dangerous moves again. So that safety plus way more life happening in the situation. So always, I keep coaxing people that are building these systems to like try the filter of what if it were alive? What if it were thinking and feeling? What would it do? So our goal in all these things is to build capable actors. So it's not just one-offs, and they understand how to be different things. Certainly, Kiwi, they've made no secret that they hope it can portray any number of those small characters, and it's really magical when they're in person. I mean, you can tell you couldn't possibly fit an actor inside of those things, and to know that it's just autonomously walking around in the world with you, and it's iconic characters. There's some that we've gotten used to them being way different size than they should be when they are not in their movie anymore, and they walk into your life like, oh, a 6-foot person is wearing Winnie the Pooh's outfit. But to have them truly stay themselves and at their proper scale is just absolutely magical. So, but the idea is, instead of building one-offs, you're trying to build a system that understands what it means to be alive, understands how to express all the different kinds of eccentricities of the individual to become different characters different days. So I need you to be this character today and need you to be a different character tomorrow. So we're still sending our babies out into the world. It's just not to replay the same scene again and again, but to show the spark of life in real time, ongoing, and build rapport and learn different things from different people. And I would just end up here with my last list of things I put together for Tina as we were first tiptoeing into this presentation. Replace motion with emotion. Replace text with behavior. Replace archetype with individual. Replace generic with eccentric, please. Replace copying with observing. Replace habit with invention. And replace thing with being. And if we do all of that well, we will have the spark of life. So thank you very much for coming along the journey with me. And now I would happily turn it over to questions, comments, other stories. Let's mix it up.
Round of applause.
All right. It's so cool. It's so nice seeing all of you. Well, all of you. I don't see Lay. I don't see John Dixon. I don't see Ron Husband. Hi, Ron. Not yet. I see your names. That's so cool. Didn't know Ron was going to be here.
Each guest has the ability to turn their microphone on.
Haha, you're wizards, all of you.
And I leave this with you, how to proceed and get the conversation going.
Okay, well, who wants to join in first? I see people drinking fluids and fidgeting and doing all kind of eccentric, one-of-a-kind things. I see a person, Jim, you're waving.
Yeah. Hey, Jerry, it was really fun to listen to your talk. It made me rethink an animation that I'm working on right now. I had a performance in mind for this character,
right?
And I had been working on it, but the very end of the performance, it's an android who gets startled when someone appears that they're not expecting.
Right.
And everything is being watched by cameras, so they have to be very careful about how big this gesture is. And they've just made a big gesture, and they have to recover from it. And and then they say one line, which is like, "You shouldn't be here," and then they walk away. And it was the walk away that I hadn't really thought about. Like, how would they still be, even though they're walking away from us? How would they be communicating how they're feeling about that little encounter they just had?
Right.
And so that's something that's, thanks very much. It was a nice inspiration.
Cool. Well, I'll be really curious to know where your solution lands. That'd be a cool thing. I don't know if it's something that would be shareable eventually, but as we have another session, by the way, as we start our next session, anything people would like to share, and I think, Tina, it might be nice if we started the next session by anybody who's gone to see off camera and has some observations about contrasting two people where they've really found spikes of difference and kind of listed or sketched or frame grabbed whatever they thought was an interesting spike of difference to set those two characters apart. It'd be great to share that. And Jim, if you have something shareable, either talking about it or showing, I'd be curious to know where that lands. That sounds cool. Well, it's neat. You took it from just a piece of movement to something where you have a puzzle to solve now, and so you're not just moving it, you're having it think and then move according to how it's proving what it's thinking and feeling by virtue of how it moves. So.
Yeah, I mean, originally I was going to have her just walk away sort of stiffly, and with short steps, sort of communicating that she's anxious and then she wants to get out of the situation as quickly as possible and get away from this person. But she's also, I think, a little disgusted by what's just happened. And so I'm thinking about how to work that into what's going on with the walk. So.
Cool. All right, very good. Well, good, Jim. I'll be waiting for that. Anyone else wanting to join in? Frederic, are you fidgeting or waving? Oh, I see David is waving.
Mostly.
Oh, okay. Well, I will let you return to your fidget for the moment, but I'm sure you'll have something. David, you were talking?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thanks for presenting that. It's really nice to have a pro present stuff for pros. Also, it's really fun to see some of my old colleagues here, James and Jim. Hey, guys.
Oh, cool.
And Ron. You and I have never had a chance to work together, but I was also at Disney from Beauty and the Beast kind of through the 90s.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah.
And so, the shot that you showed of Yoda, that was puppet in the original. Do you think that they shot that kind of the same way? So they sort of like pulled their selects out of that. So we had Frank Oz kind of doing the whole work through. I think that there's something really exciting about what you were saying there, to have a complete performance, not a cut-to-cut performance.
I'm sure that Frank and his puppeteers thought as a continuous performance. Now, obviously they had to do custom setups to achieve some of those shots. It's tricky when you're working with trying to hide puppeteers. It's not easy to get setup number 2 after setup number 1. But I'm positive that what you're saying is true, that they thought through the whole performance of the scene as one continuous acting job. And also, I thought it was so interesting, since they were using puppetry at the time, it hadn't moved to CG yet. I thought that Frank's solution with his team, it was pretty ingenious, where there was hardly an articulation in the mouth, but the eyes, and specifically how much white of the eyes you saw with the lids moving up and down, both the bottom and the upper lids expanding and contracting, they really used it almost like an emotion modulator. It's like he would get a little more excited, they get wider, and then as he would dim, they would get quieter, so, you know, get lower. So it was like their amount of width or narrowness directly affected, and continuous through scenes, like where the emotions were going, so that we get wider, and then it gets a little narrower and narrower and narrower, and a little wider and narrower. And I just thought it really made you look at that, and it made you feel that that's where the primary life was, and you forgave a lot of the inarticulate sort of like movement of the mouth and stuff. And I thought that was instructional for us, because as you're moving into robotic characters in the real world who now have the ability to sense and get around and have autonomy and have a relationship with you and recognize you the fifth time you come to visit, and it's going, hey David, oh man, what have you been up to? I didn't see you for a few weeks now. You know, so that kind of rapport in a character and continuity of building a relationship. We're still in that physical world, and there's a lot of articulation that's going to be hard to do. So it kind of takes us back to the things that Frank had to deal with back in those days. But you still do have those eyes as your friend, and not only the darts of the eyes, but you go to people that are building these things, and a lot of times someone who's building the mechanism to do an eye blink will just go blink, okay, it moved, done. But you go, no, how about a subtle nuanced, gradual, lowering of it, and then a little widening and lowering, like that. A lot of them wouldn't imagine that such fine grain nuance would be needed in a mechanism that's being built. So knowing that before you build the thing and spend the millions is a good thing. But yeah, I think Frank and his team were quite ingenious at bridging the gap.
Of course, it just makes me wonder whether or not there's a master shot somewhere in the negative supply, from the original takes, to see if they just kept a camera on the puppet doing the entire scene and then just cut everything in.
Well, it could be. It looked like there were quite a few real custom camera placements, though, so I'm sure they came back and got those specialty things. But I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
It'd be great.
Might all be in the morgue somewhere now, so who knows?
Right. And now, as we're getting into immersive worlds, that's just the expectation is that always happens. And as I say, the game world has been doing immersive stuff for a long time, but it's only recently I've been seeing real effort towards individual personality and character. Ellen Page in Beyond Two Souls made me really appreciate that she was truly being in the moment in this immersive thing, and not resorting to weight shifting and fidgety kind of automated things. It's like Ellen performing really made it come alive, even though there were limits in how it was rendered. It was a real breakthrough that I took notice of. And later I heard her talking, that was actually part of it was in Off Camera with Sam Jones, where she talked about important experiences along her journey as an actor. And she brought that up as something where she felt like she got even deeper into her acting sort of rituals, and to trust what she was feeling as a character without all the trappings of costuming and stuff around her. It really became just something that she had to completely carry in the moment while imagining everything else. So I from the outside, I had noticed, it's like, okay, gameplay, we're all used to that for years and years, but here's real acting and the spark of life happening to an extra degree inside of a game, and individuality really coming through. And then she talked about it as being an important moment for her too. So I like that. There's another one more recently. The Last of Us, the two actors that it's the first time I'd seen actors at a Comic-Con at kind of event with an adoring audience, really talking to them about how they brought out certain emotional moments from characters. So that made me appreciate that team and their attention to the individuality of a specific character. But yeah, I see some of that happening, and I think more and more that will happen. And I was so delighted to take Stasha into some of these situations of mocap. We've done some more things with her as well. and taking her into, the complete capture of the face. And we did phonemes and visemes. And it's funny that the team that was running the equipment to do the capture during that was expecting, again, sort of I wrote pronunciation of words. And I said, no, we're doing an experiment about how emotions reshape how you say a word. So if you say this word when you're happy, you say the same word when you're sad, you say the same word when you're mischievous, your mouth makes different shapes. So they're like, whoa, okay, this is a different thing. And Stasha was able to get inside that cage of like that brilliant lights and the weirdness of not being able to move your head, and did a performance that made some of the technicians in the dark get tears in their eyes, because she finally took them through this this monologue about her life that went there emotionally. And I was like, okay, there it is. We're using the new tech and we're reaching an emotional space. So I'm glad there are people that are sensitive to it here and there around the industry.
Jerry, there's a question from Serena. I see Klaus is raising his hand. Yeah, Klaus, you want to go ahead?
Oh, yes. Thanks, Jerry, for a very inspiring talk. I have one question. I think when we were in animation school in Denmark, one of the tasks we were presented was to go to public places and maybe sketch people without them noticing, so you could capture their, their emotion or something. Right. And you would sit in a distance and you can actually see without hearing what they're talking about, what kind of mood is quite interesting, but just by looking at how they interact and stuff. But I always found it a little bit rude to observe, but I guess we are observers. How do you build your library when you're working, with emotion and characterization?
I try to just remember vividly and then make note after. I, like you, I feel self-conscious to actually start sketching in front of somebody. But, that's the beauty of having something like Off Camera, where there's, I believe, 11 seasons now, with anywhere from typically around 45 minutes of just a person being in the moment all the time and without cutting things out. It lets you just be the absolute voyeur observer of every little nuance of what's going on. So that's a beautiful resource. But once you're in that mindset and you're given permission to just stare and make notes and sketch and freeze frame and do whatever you want to do. If you get in sort of that habit of noticing differences with a tool that's more blunt like that, I think then you can make even more keen observers when you go out in life, and you'll notice, if you're like standing in line for something, but then you have some time to kill, and like, instead of it being boring, you start to watch different walks people are doing, different sort of gestures. As you say, you figure out what people are talking about even without being close enough to hear, because you can tell by virtue of their gestures and how they feel about it, and which one of them is telling the story, which one of them is listening, and all of that stuff. So just becoming more keen observers over time, and then going back and making notes. Like when I saw that thing of like the thumbs in lieu of arm gestures, I just went, never seen that before. It might have happened and I didn't notice it, but I noticed it that time. And it just makes you more aware. And as you go out and watch people in public, if you look for those things, there's not only gesture palettes, but then there's fidgets, and fidgets that mean boredom, and fidgets that mean excitement, and fidgets that mean nervousness, all different kind of things. So as you come back, as if you've taken note, as soon as you get where you can type it into your phone or just speak it into your phone and say, I just saw this thing happen, don't forget, blah, blah, blah. And then make a sketch, when you get back to your home base. That's all good. Well, I'm glad you started doing that. Have you continued? You felt like once you were encouraged to be observant, has that stayed with you?
Well, I'm happy that they taught us pretty early on to be, and I had to really, I think, maybe work harder on it, because I always felt that's not very polite. But right. I guess you can do it, like you say, different ways, so it's not, intimidating or something like that. But I always struggle more. I think now I'm a better observer. Mm-hmm. But I think we need to be, so that I absolutely agree with you. So the characters that we create, they're just a blank piece of paper. Mm-hmm. But we gotta make them live. Yeah,
and there's so much value in just, if we, sometimes we take for granted, and we'll say, well, I'm just putting one or two unique things in this moment with this character, but it has so much value to people that are observing it, because most of the time they don't know why the character feels more alive to them, but it absolutely does. And it's by virtue of subconsciously they see those extra little sparks of thought and feeling like coming out through behavior. It just blooms. And even if it's just subconsciously they're being told by our own nervous system that that is a living thing, you know. And I have had so much fun. Miyazaki is a filmmaker that, to me, fearlessly lets characters have time to demonstrate sort of little eccentric moments of just quiet thought and feeling that I've always admired. And I just look for that. And there's other people that more sort of vigorously go for it. And I've always admired how when Brad Bird on films coaxes performances that reach for something unique. It's great to see it when it happens. I remember us way back when we were just students in college, and we'd look at something together like Jungle Book, and you'd see Baloo just like scratching his neck when he's thinking and talking, and we're like, that's one of those moments. It's not generic movement. It's shows him doing a little nervous fidget, and I feel more what he's feeling, and he seems to alive. So and now we have way more tools to observe and way more tools to implement all of that stuff. So but my concern, and one of the reasons I think it's great to have these discussions, is that as I was hunkered down over the last few years with people that have the skills to actually build the systems to make this stuff work. And a lot of times it's a number of people collaborating together, and each is from a different silo of silence. It's deeply studied and, PhD level and et cetera. But they also mostly are not coming from a place of being necessarily the keen observers or being animators or writers or directors or actors or any of that stuff. And I found it interesting as we'd work together to awaken their powers of observation and to understand, like when I talked about the wave versus the 6 little beats of being aware of somebody coming into the room and how the little sparks of life are blossom. A lot of times they were unaware that that was even a thing. But they were building the system to make the character live. And they were building a system that would be put out and deployed and exist, that inherently was not capable of having the full spark of life bloom. So, it's good in the early days to get in with those groups of people and absolutely honoring and respecting their brilliance in all these different areas, encouraging them to take the step back from their specialty to see the bigger picture of what's trying to be accomplished and where the magic really happens. And most of the time I've seen those people really get excited and be like more engaged than ever with what they're doing and what they're doing in combination with other people, and then start really contributing. I had people like teams of people like past midnight, tired, having like the supervisor come by to see like, are we still alive? And they're like huddled over a screen going, oh, it'll feel more this way if we do this. And, and those were like coders at the beginning that a few months before were like, what, feeling? And then once they got it, they're like, oh man, I feel it now. It's like, what time is it? Oh, it's 1 a.m. That's like, oh, I guess we'll go home. So it can make a big difference. And I just think right now, I'd rather that we don't have to do a lot of mop up after systems that aren't ready to really bring the illusion of life into the spark of life. I'd rather that we really dig in and make it happen right. And because I firmly believe it will be just as magical, and we'll have the beauty of ongoing rapport with characters and them absolutely seeming alive. And I just truly believe that will happen. And if it doesn't happen, and people write it off as more uncanny valley stuff and everything, it's not because the limitations of the technology, it's because of the limited philosophy guiding it. And you go back to the first example I gave of all these animation teams and Walt and his group becoming kings of the hill, and it was philosophy that did that, not having better technology. And I think we're just at that same moment where it can absolutely work. And I hate for the technology itself to get a bad name because people put out a bad system. It's like the technology can do it with the right coaxing.
Thanks.
Sure.
You know, there was someone here, Serena, who said she's having trouble with her microphone.
Oh, uh-oh.
Can I? Yeah.
Serena, Serena,
question?
I see your name down there. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you personally like to plan nuanced movements, keep track of them, and evolve them?
You know, to me, that's an evolution that's, I like to a lot of times rehearse things, even if it's ultimately going to be done by another performer. A lot of times myself just go through scenes and think and feel and try things. And I'll often video and audio tape myself trying something and then look back at it. And so many times you'll just go, oh, that I thought it would read, it didn't read at all. That's awful. And then try different ways and evolve through it. And then if you've gotten close to what you're looking for, then as you turn it over to someone else, it's great to see like what they would do first without any interference or input from you. Like what does their eccentric self bring to the table? So you let that bloom. And if it's better than what you tried, you just let it be. If they're still struggling with it like you were, then you can go back and show them where you landed, and something that kind of works and reads for that situation. It's so interesting too to think about the kind of gestures. And Tina, can you read to me again about was it gestures in particular you were mentioning?
It was
from Serena.
How do you personally like to plan nuanced movements and keep track of them and evolve them?
It's interesting. Sometimes tying the nuanced gesture over the longer form of a scene or sequence can be interesting. I was working on a scene with two characters. It was actually when Brad Bird and I were trying to get Will Eisner's The Spirit off the ground as an animated feature way back. But I was doing storyboards, and at the time there were people going like, why do that in animation? It's got humans. And but we absolutely believed in it. And we looked at, like, Milt Kahl's animation of Brom Bones and Ichabod is like, it's human and very expressive and fluid and dynamic and it has anatomy and all that good stuff. But I was doing storyboards for that, and the character Sans Serif had a showdown with the spirit character of just an argument. He'd come to confront her with something. And so I found it really interesting to do this sort of gestural thing, behavioral thing with her that threaded through the entire scene, where her aim is to like tell the spirit he's full of it, turn around and take a drink. She has her drink there. And then I went through all different kind of thing. My goal was like, never let her drink. It's her goal. So I would have her like about to drink and then hear what he just said and then put it down and confront him and then go back and cheer herself in the mirror, clink, with her own glass, and then come back to drink. And now he comes in between her and the glass and confronts her with another thing. And then she puts it aside, and then he takes the glass from her because he's frustrated. So now he's walking around with it. And while he's distracted, she sort of peels it out of his hands and takes it back. So I made it like a little gesture pantomime story that existed throughout the whole scene. And they never talked about the glass. They never talked about taking a drink. It was just a showdown between two wills. But that, like, taking the gestures and saying, I'm going to make it be, the gesture be her intention of just serving herself. It's like, I'm done with him, I need a drink. And then have the choreography of the scene somehow always prevent that from happening. And it made my engagement with their body language and the choreography of the two characters and her one sort of intention shown through her gestures way more interesting to do. And I actually have that posted deep in my website. which you could look at some point. Maybe I'll put a link to that. But that's one example, Serena.
Thank you, Jerry. Juan, I see that you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question or
Yes.
get involved? Awesome.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Jerry. This kind of puts in together a couple of things that I've seen this last week. So like my brain right now is kind of bubbling. So I'm very excited, very excited. It's a quick comment talking about something I just saw this morning, talking Sergio Pablos. He was talking about the sweet spot for the acting, like right in between the typical very exaggerated cartoon animation, right? And right in between the very like rotoscoping live action, right? So he was arguing that it's right there in the middle, like taking the like this style, taking the part of the live action and pulling the strings, you know, like feeling its purest form, right? And the second thing was someone brought to my attention that, you know, like in the books, when you're reading something, you can see the character's thoughts, right? And you can and you have to imagine what they do and what the space looks like. But rather in film, it's like the opposite. So you have to imagine what the character is thinking, because we don't often have the you know, the use of off voice, you know, off-screen voice. So like my mind is right, like firing in between these things. But I do have one question. And
I'll have some feedback on that in a moment, but go ahead.
Great. I do have one question, which is, do you have any particular way in which you kind of categorize or differentiate different characters? You know, like, for example, do you separate them by their physicality? Like this one moves a lot his hands, or this one does a lot of head movements, or it's something more like personality traits?
I think you have to go to, you're typically describing sort of an archetype or a type of character. I think we have to go all the way past that. Yes, pick a type of character that you're interested in that kind of fits, but then go past that to find the eccentric behavior of that one character. So even if he were in a scene with 10 other archetypes that are the same, it's like he or she or it would still stand out as being itself. So you have to find out something that's beyond those generalities, that gets down to the specific thing of this character likes to rip things maybe. And it's like, if it finds a little napkin, it'll rip it into half, and then those halves into halves and whatever, and make snow rain down or something. And none of the other characters even do that. And it does that because it constantly is nervous and worried about things falling apart or whatever. You make a reason and you build something that only that one character does. And it might be a little tick that it does, or anything that makes it absolutely stand apart as the one, even after you've made it a specific archetype. It's like you're not done when you do archetype. You go all the way to the individual. And that I'd invite you to look around. You might take some of it from observations you make about people, and you combine several eccentric one qualities from different people you've noticed that strike you as very interesting, and you combine them in this one unique character that uses 2 or 3 attributes that you thought were stood alone as not being types of thing that those kinds of people always do that, but this one person did a thing I've never seen before, and it's unique only to him or her. So I think that's more the goal. And if also just going back to your thing about style and what Sergio had talked about with acting, I'm much more agnostic about that. I think there's a whole range of styles that are appropriate for different stories. I've been a director of live actors, and sometimes it's just for that. And they stay live actors. They were in front of the camera, and I'm trying to get the best performance out of them. Sometimes it's something that's in CG, but it's meant to look absolutely photoreal, and it is not seeking exaggeration. If anything, it's a real effort to try to get the micro expression where if you have just a brilliant actor like Meryl Streep, and she does these little micro expressions, and none of us can figure out why, but she has this thing that can reach us, and she's able to communicate with us. I'm not about to say, hey, yeah, rigger guy, go in and retarget. And when she does this expression, change it to something else. It's like, I don't want you to retarget anything. It's like Meryl Streep has this magical thing. We can't even figure out what it is. Respect her micro expressions. So I go from that extreme down to something that doesn't have millions of data points that it's throwing at us, that has maybe hundreds, because it's simpler kind of animation style and it's not live action. It's playing in a space that's much more theatrical, and the point in that whole sort of story world is much more about the theater of what things feel like when they happen in life, instead of the documentary of what they look like when they happen in life. And for that, when you, instead of millions of data points coming at you and you respect the micro expressions, when you have a few hundred data points coming at you, it's sort of your task to caricature so that more statement comes from those fewer data points. So it equals a bigger statement when you're done. The simpler thing makes a bigger statement. You are free in those simpler animation forms and caricature and animation forms to go way further than live action ever would. And for something that's truly animated and stylized and breaks you out of a documentary world, then I would go to the opposite extreme, and I'd say, if you have something like a character terrified and leaving the room, like fleeing from something terrible, if you do something where in a few frames, like there's a blur frames, like 2 blur frames, and then the character's just gone and there's a slipstream of papers flying through after where they went, that much more tells the people in the audience, like, yes, that's how being terrified feels. You just captured what it feels like when I'm terrified. You didn't capture a documentary of what it looks like when I'm terrified and I trip out of the room, which would take much longer. So in that caricatured, stylized world of animation, you are in a world that welcomes people into something that they know is not documentary. It's about emotions more than it is about a documentary statement. And I think what people expect you to do is to reach deepest into their feelings and grab them. And so complete caricature, not just halfway, like he was saying, halfway between live action and caricature. I think going all the way to complete stylization of emotion, so that you're doing the bullseye on the emotional feeling, a caricature of your emotions at that moment. And then there are places that are in between, like Brom Bones is a good example of a character that looks like, Milk Hall probably acknowledged some live action reference, but didn't stick to it, definitely made the extremes more extreme, made it much more exaggerated than would happen in life, but it feels absolutely comfortable in that slightly caricatured space. And so since I've been involved with directing animation from very caricatured and simple all the way to directing live actors when they're being very nuanced in an emotional space, I accept all of it, but I just insist that each style be right for the story it's telling. And so I think that for the appropriate story, for the appropriate kind of world you're building, you can land on a different style sort of rule set per project that you're doing, and let your story guide you to the appropriate style in that case.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
sorry, just because
Hey, Juan. Mhm.
I don't want Sergio to think that I didn't understand what he was saying, because he wasn't actually mentioning about the styling or the stylization so much, right? It was more about what you mentioned before. That was like the archetypes, right? Like, because cartoons so often move so alike, like you mentioned. Michael, like the head shake. So we have, like, I am an animator, and we kind of resort to the same old resources to give life to the characters, but they kind of tend to look pretty much the same,
Right. And so the task, and that was way back when I was first at Disney. Eric Larson, one of Disney's veterans, one of the 9 old men, as they called them, actually had me give a talk to my peers at the time, specifically about that puzzle where, I was saying the quandary is we are all gathered here to make a project together, so we have to match. The audience shouldn't look at scene to scene and go like, oh, different animator, whoa, different animator, that we have to blend. But in seeking to blend and match styles, then the danger is characters become homogenous and don't stand out as uniquely him or herself or itself. And we lose the spark of life. So it was reminding people of the challenge of not relying on the crutch of just archetype and matching, but trying to make sure that each character had its own personality space.
Nice.
All right, I see Jordan and Frederica. I see both of you kind of getting ready to say something, I think.
I guess I'll just say real quick. I guess it's just a piggyback on what you just said. I noticed that like in older animated films, like for instance, like Aladdin, for instance, you can kind of sort of tell like which animator worked on which thing, just from the different movements and different kind of look of the characters. But they did such an amazing job just making sure it's all in the exact same world, if that makes sense.
Right. It's definitely for people who are aficionados of animation and study different animators can see little qualities peeking through with Eric Goldberg or Glenn Keane, it's Bruce Smith, etc. They're just people have a touch that comes through, but they are still, a lot of times the solution is either people sorting into the type of character that they'd be most appropriate to tend to while they have that unique style, or to pick a kind of scene. It's very interesting. A lot of people think that in live action, think that animators just are kind of assembly line workers that do all the same stuff. And they're kind of shocked when I tell them, no, there's some animators I work with who are great at sensitive scenes, and they're just brilliant at making tenderness work. But they're terrible at action. I give them the action scene, they have to do it 20 times to even get close. There's other people who are great at action, but maybe dramatic action, but they can't figure out how comedy comes into play. And there's somebody else who's great at, like, they can make everything comedic. And a few people who, flow between all those different realms, but people just in the same way that with live actors that, people to have different interests and strengths in the characters they do. So even though they have those differences, hopefully they're cast appropriately into the kinds of scenes, the kinds of sequences, kinds of characters that really suit their strengths.
And sorry, I was just thinking about a scene that I remember for the first time was when I watched Cinderella.
Right.
And there was this scene where I think the evil stepmother is sitting in her bed with a cup of tea or something.
Yeah.
And she's stirring it. And that made it much more intense and I guess cruel. She was just stirring and talking, but that's all she did. And I remember that being very, disturbing.
That's a great observation. Doing something that's usually associated with pleasantries and quiet time and comfort, while doing something inherently cruel. It's a great contrast. It's like I'm preparing to have my tea while I sentence you to hell. That's great.
So sometimes there's a lot of things in not doing a lot. That was just
right. Absolutely. And I this is something else that was kind of a revelation when I was talking to someone in the robotics field who had a lot of experience. It was brilliant, but they thought they had, had misinterpretations about some animation. And I mentioned what you did, that caricature doesn't always mean more. Caricature can mean less. If a character is frightened of something and gets very quiet, or is very suspicious of what's being said and gets quiet to overhear, a live actor might tone that down, what they were doing 80%. In animation, you might tone it down 99% and just have only the eyes move for a moment and get more. Your caricature is in being less movement and more quiet, and to lead your eye to the one little thing that moves, to really let you see that. If you have your eye being, there's competition and there's like 6 things moving on the body at once, you don't necessarily see that. But if you have everything freeze except for just the little eye dart, you will see the eye dart. So
kind of like a Chuck Jones cartoon.
Yeah. Yes. So yes, character control, go bigger and smaller. All right, Ron, it's good to see you. And Frederic, you have a question yet? How about you, Landon? You have something else to add?
Mostly I'm just listening in.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, it's I just hope that all of you think about the eccentric differences that set people apart, and in your characters bring that into your work. And that's been our something that's Ron, you're waving.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I just turned my mic on.
Okay, cool.
I'm just saying I really appreciate the talk and what you are bringing to the media with your presence. Just to bring attention to the small things that really make a scene or a character stand out and be unique, and that comes from I'm sure your animation background. Because again, we're as animator with your background, you're able to see more than every person does see. And to bring that out and bring it to attention to those who are responsible for trying to bring animation or animatics to life. So
Right.
I really appreciate what you're doing and how you're going about doing it, because again, you bring that animator sensitivity to the table and call them to adhere to that. And I really appreciate what you're doing, man.
Thanks. And that it does go back to the animation days and the coaxing from our mentors to, it's so easy to fall into. Yeah, we just were in love with what Bill Teitla did, and Freddie Moore, and Eric and Milton and Frank and Ollie, et cetera, and we would often mimic them. We would try to copy them, and they kept saying, well, when we came up with it, we weren't copying other animators. We were looking at life. They talked about things like coming out of a bar when they were on a trip to South America, and I think Wooly laying on the sidewalk, even though it was raining, and looking up at the lightning and just going, oh my God, look at that. And later, putting it into a scene in Pinocchio, because it's he's had an impression of that lightning from life lying in the rain. And there was I don't know if you remember this, Ron, but we were on the Fox and the Hound way back. And I'll just mention it because it recently was brought to my attention that somebody noticed years later. We were working on early days of the Fox and the Hound, and one of the characters was Dinky, and there was Dinky and Boomer, the 2 birds that hung out together. And so I was going to start animating Dinky the bird, and I went out and was looking at real birds by the commissary on the lawn at Disney, and they were doing all these quick moves. They might have 2 or 3 poses in 1 second. And I went, but they're not confusing me. I completely understand everything they're doing. This is not Bedlam. I should be able to now capture this and animate it and have them do just as much posing, more than, they're like breaking all the rules. We were told you can't do that. That's not good animation. But I went, it's happening in life. It's happening in nature. I should be able to bring that in. So, I put in the effort and did little things where it'd be like one frame with a blur and then just a streak of color. And then suddenly the head is in another place, and little tail flips that would happen and associated with hops. And when it would go to take off, just the whole body leaned slightly forward and then looked like 20 wings suddenly exploded out, and then the character gone except for the tail. And so, Art and Ted fell in love with that, and they really thought it was something different. Now, I'll sort of go back to the middle, but years later, I had no idea. It was brought to my attention by a senior producer at NBC News like 2 months ago. He said, he got in touch with me and we did a whole discussion. And he said, by the way, Ted Berman, one of the directors of The Fox and the Hound, talked about you in an interview 10 years later, and here it is. And so he read it back to me, and I had no idea this happened, but Ted was saying, we had fallen into a routine of how to animate birds for many years. And this guy, Jerry Reese, came along and he totally shocked the system by doing something different. And it was just, I found it so delightful and blah, blah. So anyway, he did a whole bunch of praise about that and had bothered to mention it in an interview a decade after the film was done. And I had no idea that it had made that sort of impression. If you cut back to what was going on at the time, I am even more surprised with his reaction, because even though they were excited by what they saw happening on the screen, when they asked to look at my drawings and they flipped through and looked a frame at a time, they went, "Oh, no, you can't do this. No, that doesn't belong in a feature. That's like cartoony, and no, you can't do that." So they would love it in movement. They would hate it drawing by drawing. So we actually, and Ron, this really happened where we had to go through a system of hiding what we were doing from the directors. So my two assistants, Rebecca and Sue, when they would do my cleanup, they would take the stack of drawings and remove any offensive poses, which were the secret to it having a sparkle on the screen, by the way. But they would remove all of those things and take the average looking drawings to be approved, then reinsert them back in and let it go through ink and paint and camera. And Art and Ted would think, A, that they had taught me a lesson of what not to do, and then B, be delighted by what happened on the screen. They didn't know that I was like, we had this whole system of deceiving them, because I just was so frustrated because they loved the result, but they could not accept the new process to achieve the results. So we had to hide the process from them. Now, Eric Larson was aware of all of that. And Eric had me give a talk to the group, basically saying, rebel, at the time, where he gave me a special screening room where I could put up 35mm film and pause the frame at a time without burning the film. It would put a little dowser down that would cut a lot of the light out. We could still see it. And so I told the whole group, we have been told you cannot do these things because they're too cartoony. I will now show you from nature an actual bird, and this was filmed with an actual camera. So this is nature did this. And I would show them frame by frame the real bird sitting on a branch, and then slightly moving forward, then just becoming a streak of color with an explosion of feathers that looked like 20 wings, and then it was gone. And I said, okay, we are being told that that's cartoony, but a real bird just did that. So it's not too cartoony. If anything, we're supposed to caricature life. So how can we take that even further? And Eric was sitting in the back of the room listening to me say rebel, and he was jingling the keys in his pocket and chuckling. And he was encouraging that kind of thing, because he knew we needed to explore, and to keep the illusion of life going, we needed to look at life, bring it in, use it. And so he was determined that we keep up the fight, keep doing it, even though at the time, the directors were found a lot of discomfort in thinking about that. And so we had to hide it from them to get it in. I was shocked that 10 years later, he went, that was really special work that guy Jerry did. And I thought, well, little did he know how much effort we had to put in to get it past him so that he would appreciate it. But anyway, it's crazy stuff. But I still see now that as we're moving forward, there's different processes. Some people are suspicious of them. I certainly remember in the going from traditional animation, I was the only person from our department that jumped headfirst into Tron. And a lot of people were saying, oh, it's the devil, it's push button art, and it'll rob us of our jobs and whatever. Even the Academy refused to give us any acknowledgement for the visual effects that were done in Tron because they thought we pushed a button and a film came out. And it was so handcrafted. My God, I did, and for when I was choreographing the recognizers, bouncing into each other with magnetic force, we had no algorithm for that. I actually did stop motion on a downshooter Lion Lamb animation camera, just stop motion until it looked like magnetic force. And then I just gave numbers to our computer team to type in to make that happen. But at the time, I was taking all the traditional training, but looking at the new tech as the next brush that we would use to tell a story. And eventually, of course, we're all here with vivid characters living in that computer space. But there was a lot of fear of it. I think now, as we're looking at AI and we're looking at immersive things, we're looking at autonomy in all its different forms. And, I just think we need that same eyes wide open, brave participation in it to guide it towards a really healthy, creative, expressive place, because it can be very generic and awful. But it can also be wonderful, but it has to be coaxed there. The systems do not teach themselves any of this stuff. And yes, there is machine learning certain things that sort of undertend, but you're even guiding that towards what to pay attention to before you set it on its way. So, we have to be very vigilant about coaxing the system builders towards being sensitive to and participating in this. And as many people who, all of you, if you can find ways to reach in and participate with that and help it happen in a good way, that I would encourage that greatly.
How's everybody doing?
I see more people. I see all these names. I see Kathy and Madeline and Nicholas, Justine. Yes.
Hey.
Hi, I'm sorry. I had a question earlier, but you kind of touched on it about Uncanny Valley, but I have to go. I have a work meeting now. But thank you so much for everybody who's part of this. This has been such a great experience. I'm really looking forward to the next session. So take care.
All right. Good to have you with us. Have a good rest of your day. In the website, I'll also do the little spirit, the storyboard sketches that I'd done of Sans Serif trying to get her drink and never getting it. It was rough, so I'll put a link there too. All right, so next time we're diving in a little more into different areas. I think next time I won't have quite as big a presentation deck. It'll be more sort of talking about storytelling, about how to integrate sort of new things into our lives. And good to see all of you. I'm glad to have all of you around the campfire. And I hope eventually we do graduate to the VR goggles, although they still haven't made a comfortable one yet, with the campfire in the middle. And as we chat with each other and we say certain keywords, things come out of the sparks in the fire and we can tell stories about them. So we will get there, Tina, eventually. But for now, this is a nice surrogate for that.